been a few weeks since I made my last video, and in that period of time, Luigi Mangione was arrested and charged with killing the United Healthcare CEO. Crime in the New York City subways became a national topic of discussion yet again after a woman was set on fire on the subway. The public learned that New York State corrections officers beat Robert Brooks to death, and the public didn't learn that Rikers corrections officers allowed Charisma Jones to die because they refused to get her medical attention. Crime policing and criminal justice is my wheelhouse, particularly in New York City, so many people have been asking me what I think about everything that's happening. So I have a whole lot to talk about today. So about a month ago, someone shot the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, at 6 a.m. on the streets of Midtown. Since then, a 26-year-old white man named Luigi Mangione has been accused of and charged with the murder. And I do think it's important to emphasize that he's been charged, not convicted. He has not had a trial or any evidence presented against him in court yet, so we should presume his innocence. Anyway, this case has gotten wall-to-wall coverage because many, if not the majority of people, approve of the murder because of the callous, predatory, remorseless nature of the health insurance companies in this country that prefer to let swaths of people suffer and die so that they can make exorbitant amounts of money off of our backs. So, you will not hear me lecturing people who don't wish to lend their sympathies to the CEO of a health insurance company that they perceive as responsible for the loss of far more lives than his own. As far as the overall celebration of Luigi Mangione, though, I have many different thoughts. There's been much made of this killing, with many people arguing that this proves that there's class solidarity because both sides of the political spectrum are united in their hatred of the health insurance industry and their support for Luigi. I disagree with that idea. I first want to acknowledge that while I do think Luigi Mangione's race and perceived attractiveness by the masses who are lusting over him obviously plays into why he's received the amount of support and media coverage he has, I don't think they're the primary reasons for it. In fact, I know it's not, because it would be dishonest not to acknowledge that even before his identity was revealed, many people supported the killer before they knew the killer's alleged identity. Although they did know that the killer appeared to be white, even though NYPD did attempt to mislead the public into thinking the killer may have been a light-skinned black man. And the reason they did that is because they know the race and identity of the killer would alter public perception and the amount of support for the killer. Which is why, as for the notion that the mass support he's receiving represents true solidarity on this issue between all sides of the political spectrum, I think that's an illusion. Despite the apparent consensus of support for the reasons Luigi is assumed to have killed the United Healthcare CEO, if Luigi Mangione was Jerome Jackson, not only would many of the people supporting Luigi, especially those on the right, be actively against him and calling for a state-sanctioned execution, as well as he would have likely been executed instead of arrested, but probably most importantly is the fact that it would be unlikely that the public would even have been made aware of the reasons that motivated him to kill the CEO on the scale that Luigi's alleged motivations have been reported. The case would have never been reported to us in the way that it has. It wouldn't have received the media coverage it has. I don't say this just because of my general faith in the fact that America does not respond to Black people doing anything the way it responds to white people doing it. I say this because it's a historical fact. Despite how many people are moved by what Luigi did, specifically because they perceive him as actually doing something, doing the thing, when others haven't, the truth is that there are Black and brown political prisoners all over this country, most of whom were hit with terrorism charges and sentenced to life, and many in the grave that you've never heard of because the media would not dream of giving them and why they did what they did the opportunity to reach the hearts and the minds of the masses on this level. For as much commentary and outrage there's been about Luigi being charged with terrorism, while people who've committed arguably more heinous crimes weren't, because the system values the life of a CEO over everyday people. Which is true, the part about the system valuing the lives of the rich, white, or powerful over ours. It wouldn't be true, though, that Luigi is receiving the brunt of the system's abuses or unprecedented abuse, neither in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, where Jamel Floyd was killed by corrections officers, or the court. Terrorism charges are weaponized against Black people who do far less than Luigi did every day all across the country, but particularly in New York City, where Black Lives Matter protesters who vandalize property get charged with terrorism. Who specifically come to mind are two Ivy League lawyers, Colin Ford Mattis and Aruj Rahman, who threw a Molotov cocktail at a police car during a 2020 Black Lives Matter protest, and they were charged with a series of felonies. The prosecutors sought a terrorism enhancement, and they were eventually convicted, disbarred, and sent to prison. But why am I pointing all of this out? I'm not trying to make an arbitrary point about how the system and the public is harder on Black people, nor am I arguing that because it is, Luigi shouldn't be receiving the amount of support he's receiving or anything like that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't applaud or support Luigi or whatever you want to do, nor am I trying to minimize the significance of what he is about to experience in the criminal system. I'm addressing the specific idea that the support for Luigi represents true class solidarity. Because if class solidarity cannot exist where race is concerned, if people would not be willing to prioritize their desire to put an end to the medical care and the health insurance industry in this country as it is if Luigi were Jerome, that class solidarity is not real, or at least it's not strong enough to serve as a long-term foundation. It will fall apart. And if the reported rumors are to be believed about Luigi's hatred of the health insurance companies stemming from experiencing back pain, there is something inherently unsettling and unrelatable to me about a privileged young white man seemingly experiencing for the first time a fraction of the kind of injustice Black people are forced to live with and endure again and again, especially by the medical industry, and feeling compelled to kill someone and being praised for it when we wouldn't be. But I still wouldn't disagree with anyone else who thinks it's a good way for him to use his privilege. I also would hope that people can contextualize their advocacy for Luigi and not represent the treatment he's receiving for what he's accused of doing as unprecedented injustice in the system, when he is being treated significantly better than the everyday poor Black and brown New Yorkers in our criminal system who stand accused of way less, who wouldn't and don't receive your public support for their freedom for so much as having a gun, or even just being homeless or seeming scary on the train. As well as I don't believe that murdering a single CEO will lead to systemic change to healthcare in this country. And no, Luigi allegedly killing the United Healthcare CEO is not why Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield reversed their policy that would limit reimbursements for anesthesia during surgery and medical procedures. Both New York and Connecticut governments had already stepped in to stop that policy. But it is good timing though. That being said, I don't think it's harmful if you disagree with me and or see this entire case as far more significant than I do. I think reasonable minds can disagree on this issue, and I don't truly care to yuck anybody's yum. I really don't care much about whoever murdered the United Healthcare CEO, and I generally find the ease in which young white men can be radicalized to kill people for any reason unsettling. But I care more about the reverberating consequences for poor Black and brown New Yorkers who already live at the mercy of Eric Adams' police state, that he already regularly manufactures consent for expanding just by scaring people about the thoughts of guns and crime. So imagine what he's able to do when a well-to-do white man gets shot in broad daylight in Midtown. So from that vantage point, as someone who's just always having to fight back against narratives that will be exploited to increase police funding and presence in Black neighborhoods, I can't say that I was thrilled about a white man traveling to New York City to shoot someone in the street, effectively handing Eric Adams, Kathy Hochul, the powers that be an excuse to make moves that will not affect people like Luigi Mangione. And of course, Eric Adams did not surprise me. He has been everywhere using this as an opportunity to cry for CEOs, to try to drum up support for the NYPD, despite the fact that it was a McDonald's employee who allegedly found Luigi, and making Luigi do a perp walk in order to try to butter up to Donald Trump and the other CEOs he likes to cozy up to, and to try to distract from the fact that he was doing his own perp walk a couple months ago when he was indicted with a litany of federal crimes. Eric Adams has always used the media and selective outrage to play up self-serving narratives about crime, as well as to distract the public from what he doesn't want them to know. I saw that firsthand when I interviewed him on The Breakfast Club, when he chose to invoke the death of one officer while refusing to acknowledge the NYPD officers murdering 19-year-old Wynn Rosario the night before the interview. For as much as Eric Adams has made a spectacle of Luigi and poured his heart out for scared CEOs everywhere, you would have no idea that the same week the United Healthcare CEO was killed, so was a 17-year-old migrant teenager, Uremi Colino, who was attacked and stabbed to death by a group of 3 men. The men reportedly approached 2 migrant boys, one of whom was Uremi, and asked them if they spoke English. When they answered no, the men attacked them and fatally stabbed Uremi. A gruesome hate crime that you would have no idea happened if you were relying on Eric Adams to mention it, or to devote the extensive resources to that case as they have the United Healthcare killer. And why is that? Because it doesn't benefit a man who spent his entire administration stoking hate towards migrants and convincing the public that they're the fair, that the truth is a migrant was killed because of the very kind of hate he fostered. And while you haven't heard of the murder of Uremi, what you probably have heard about is that a woman died after being set on fire on the train by a homeless immigrant man. What's interesting is how many headlines and posts I've seen about a woman dying after being set on fire on the train by a homeless immigrant man. Yet the woman's identity is seldom revealed in any of these headlines, posts, or the articles themselves. And there's a reason for that. The woman who was set on fire was also homeless. And these kinds of stories are usually sensationalized, not just because of the horrific nature of the crime or the worthiness of the story, but also to continue the vilification of homeless and migrant New Yorkers, especially those on the subway. It was important to the media and NYPD alike to identify the perpetrator of the crime as a homeless person and an immigrant, but not the victim, because they're invested in highlighting who they believe New Yorkers should fear, which they've decided are homeless people and migrants respectively, while never highlighting the dangers homeless people or migrants themselves face on the streets and just how little anyone cares about it. It's important that people understand that victims and perpetrators often belong to the exact same communities. Our media, the police, and the government love to frame crime as though there are these evil criminals who belong to one community and victims who belong to another, but that is not the case. And it's precisely why we can't offer these blanket condemnations, vilifications, and dehumanizations of any one group, because you're hurting the victims too. And all of that is significantly relevant when talking about what happened to that woman who was set on fire in the subway. Her name was Debrina Kawam, and she was 57 years old. She grew up in a middle-class home in New Jersey. Her father worked for General Motors. She went to college. She worked. Then she fell into debt and the bank foreclosed her home, leaving her homeless. That's so important. One, because her life matters, but two, because people choose to perceive homeless people as a separate entity from us regular people, when in fact, they are us. They're what happens to us when we lose our jobs unexpectedly, when we or our loved ones get sick, when emergencies arise, because the truth is that the average American lives paycheck to paycheck, and we're all just a few unfortunate events away from finding ourselves ass out. And that's especially true in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Many of us are simply fortunate. We are lucky. We have community, family, and support systems we can rely on in times of need. But that's all it is. What happened to Deborah happens to so many people. In fact, a few years ago, I remember something similar happening to a woman who ended up freezing to death on a bench outside. And what's seldom talked about is why so many homeless women end up on the streets as opposed to a shelter. And that's because of the heightened amounts of violence and sexual abuse women experience in the shelters at the hands of the men there. And that is not an indictment on homeless people or homeless men. It's an indictment of men. What happens in the shelters is a microcosm of what happens to women in our society at large, what happens on our college campuses. What's incredible to me is that Debrina was sleeping on the train because of the systems that left her unemployed, that took her home, that left her with nowhere safe to lay her head. And when those circumstances allowed for another person to set her on fire, while onlookers just stared and the police officer can be seen on video simply walking by and leaving her to die, the national topic of discussion doesn't become about a single systemic problem that made her death possible. We're not talking about why she was on the train, why no one helped her. We're not talking about housing, poverty, consumer protection, banks, nothing. We don't consider how our continued vilification of homeless people contribute to why no one helped her, why the police didn't help her. We're not using this to illustrate why policing is not the answer to homelessness and crime in the city or the subways, because despite having one of the biggest police departments in the country, despite putting thousands more police in the subways during Eric Adams' administration, the police were present when this happened to her and they did not lift a finger to help. We're somehow not using it to point out that Eric Adams warned the homeless, him involuntarily committing homeless people, him destroying their encampments, him taking money away from homelessness services, his constant criminalization and dehumanization of homeless people has not done shit to protect anyone. Instead, somehow, the only thing that these kinds of things are ever used to highlight is why we somehow need more policing, why we need more of the same failed approach that we already recognize obviously isn't addressing the problem or making anyone feel safer. It's always more police, not more affordable housing, not more wages, not more opportunity. One of the statements Eric Adams made about this incident was that this is why he says people should not be living on our subways. But what he fails to consider is adequately funding homeless services or providing real affordable housing in this city. Not tiny broom closets that cost thousands and thousands of dollars, real affordable housing. My problem is never with New Yorkers or anyone who wants to feel safer, who care about crime. We all do. I'm your ally in that. Even though I recognize that extreme acts of violence are still outliers in our city and that New York City is one of the safest big cities in the country, I am no less hurt and concerned and unnerved when those acts of violence occur. Where we disagree is on how to address that, because I can't understand why policing failures are never treated as such. People are never angry with the police who fail to protect them, who we give billions of dollars to. They're always manipulated into being angry with the people who advocate that we reinvest into people and communities, who point out that the rising issue of homelessness is directly related to the rising and exorbitant costs of living in the city, that perhaps it's a bad idea to take millions out of schools, healthcare, homeless services while giving all that money to NYPD. My greatest frustration is how we've all been tricked into believing police are always the answer. If crime is down, it's treated as proof police are successful and we need more police. If crime is up, then it's treated as proof we need more police. It's illogical, but it's deliberate, which is why Eric Adams, Kathy Hochul, NYPD, the media, and the other powers that be have been both manipulating and distracting the public. Because while we're being inundated with wall-to-wall coverage about Luigi, including a damn Hulu documentary, which doesn't even make any goddamn sense because he hasn't even been convicted or had a trial or a hearing. But while we're being inundated with this coverage, what you aren't hearing is that not only did Marcy Correctional Facility corrections officers beat a handcuffed black man to death, 43-year-old Robert Brooks. Not only did a 23-year-old black woman, Charisma Jones, die in Rikers because corrections officers refused to provide her with the medical attention she begged for, these things been happened. Robert Brooks was killed in 2023. Charisma died months ago. And the reason you didn't hear about any of these things is because the same Eric Adams facing felony charges himself, but making a spectacle out of Luigi, that same man put a stop to the Department of Corrections, informing the public who dies in their custody. And it's not just New York City Mayor Eric Adams doing a bunch of it's also our Governor Kathy Hochul, who recently vetoed 2 laws, one that would have expanded reproductive rights and allowed people to know what hospitals in New York provide particular procedures, including abortions. And she also vetoed a law that would have allowed formerly incarcerated people to regain their right to sit on juries. Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul often work in concert to prevent transparency. The only reason we know what happened to Robert Brooks or Charisma is because their families are fighting back. Robert Brooks was beaten to death in 2023, but it's only now that the body camera footage has been released to the public that the officers have even been fired, but still no charges for a murder we can see them commit. Which is why it's incumbent on me to highlight a bill that was recently signed into law in Ohio by their governor, Mike DeWine. He signed a law that would allow the police to charge people hundreds of dollars for footage, including body camera footage. That shit is evil and deliberate, and it's meant to ensure that the public doesn't find out about the horrific crimes the police routinely commit. People always assume people like me are unwilling to recognize crime when it happens, in fear of it serving as proof we need more police. But in reality, it should be proof that over-policing has not worked, because it does not work. We have to actually address the root causes. If our government thinks homeless people are an issue, they should provide people with housing. If they're scared that there are mentally ill people on the streets and in the subways, provide people with mental health care, not temporary jail cells. Now, if you're saying to me, well, align me, that's why we love Luigi, because we got to shoot a couple of CEOs for the government to decide to give people health care or housing, then okay, that's your right. Don't shoot me with your big gun.